Hello. Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate everyone joining us today. I'm pleased to present to you Tom Carpenter, Senior Vice President of Fifth Third Bank. Tom Carpenter is a Senior Vice President and Senior Financial Claims or Crimes Compliance Director tasked with enterprise fraud risk management. He has oversight for fraud control environments and strategic fraud roadmaps. He works closely with all lines of business to the departments and supports the lines to develop fraud strategies that do not only reduce risk, but also focuses on business enablement and customer experience. Tom joined Fifth Third back in February 2011. Tom previously served as a vice president and senior product development manager for a retail bank that oversaw deposit risk strategies and management of fee income products, overdraft, early access, check cashing, and money remittance. He also held executive roles in managing personal lending products and implementing strategy initiatives for consumer banks. Before joining Fifth Third, he was an executive at FIS. He spent nearly 10 years with FIS and held various roles such as Director of Fraud Operations, Head of Underwriting, Merchant Acquisitions, as well as Strategic Business Development functions. Now I will turn the screen over to Tom. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Troy, for the introduction. I think I listened to my bio and I think what a bunch of boring jobs I've had in life. But what we're going to talk about today is a very exciting job I have, which is the Enterprise Director of Fraud for Fifth Third. So for those of you on here that bank with Fifth Third, thank you so much for your business. For those that don't bank with Fifth Third, good news. We're going to talk about the industry today. So most of the things I'm going to talk to you is not a Fifth Third phenomena. It is something to look out for across any banking relationship you have. And we're going to focus on internal control today. And I'm going to leave you at the end of this discussion with some tips, things that we've found very helpful with our clients in mitigating fraud. And we understand it's a big topic. It's scary at times, especially if you've had the cyber discussions. Those can be have a dramatic impact on your organization. You know, I came up through the finance organization. I deal a lot with finance, and you know, the risk of fraud is so much bigger than financial, right? Is regulatory, reputation. If you're publicly traded, the last thing you want to see is your firm mentioned on a breach. So we all know that. So let's jump in a little bit. This is going to be a very unusual approach to talking about fraud with businesses, but is so important for business leaders to understand what's going on out there in the consumer space. And the reason it's important is because the same consumers that are falling victim to fraud are some of your employees. And so how we train our customers at Fifth Third Bank, how you train your employees, there's a lot of intersection with these efforts. And we've found that, you know, training and awareness, it's hard, it's difficult to administer, it's difficult to get the word out on what to look out for. But it's a battle we have to continue to fight, both again within the bank and outside in your firms. I just want to touch on a couple of these because I find them fascinating. These are scams that this bank has observed, along with I'm on several industry roundtables and committees, so my peers have contributed some to this, what I'm going to talk to you about. But these scams they'll start to make sense to you when you think about where you're at risk. I mean, you know, we talk about a sweetheart scam, which is really a lot of times it's done over social media where there is genuine belief by a person that they have met their match online, and there's a game that's being played where their match might say, hey, I'm going to send you some money. I'm out on an oil rig. I don't have access to a bank, but I'm going to mail you a check. If you could put that in your account and move some of it to my sister's account. I mean, it gets very convoluted, and consumers fall for it daily. This is the largest scam type that we see inside our bank, and my peers agree that this is a big problem. And again, this will relate to you as we talk about how your employees can fall victim to the same types of scams. One of the things that's disturbing me or troubling me is a friend of mine went out on Snapchat. I'm too old to go on Snapchat, but he was out on Snapchat, And within a couple of days of signing up for the service, he was basically they tried to lure him into 3 to 5 scams. I think 3 the first day, and then he said a couple more. And the interesting thing about these scams is, of course, they want to know where you have a bank account. They want to know things about you that they can't ordinarily find out through social media. But one of the things they're asking is, where do you work? And they're trying to figure out if there's a way to really monetize this scam, not just get the consumer and their money, but figure out if they'll go out to LinkedIn, they'll try to find out what your employees do at your firm and figure if there's a way that they move money that they can take advantage of by creating this relationship on the consumer side. So if you're not reading up on some of these trends around social engineering and scams, I highly encourage you to do so, because if a customer is negligent with their bank account, a consumer, odds are they're not as vigilant as we want them to be with your money, with your accounts, with your data, with your access to your networks. And so it's really important to understand this intersection. So I just put some out here for you if you want to look them up. They're really interesting. The bottom right one over there on the car wrap scam is one that I've found to be troubling. Easy to monetize. So anyway, there's some homework if you want to go learn some stuff about scams. It really does impact you. So I want to start out with a question here. And it's this very basic question on how would you describe your employee fraud training program? So would you think, is it highly formal? Do you have, CPUs that can do like tutorials? Is it just on an as-needed basis? Is it siloed? You can see the options. So I'll give you a second to answer the polling question. Awesome. So the majority of respondents have a formal annualized training program. That is great. That's a habit we should all be in. I know it can take time and work, but that's your opportunity to bring forward different things that are going on that could affect your business. So that's awesome. So 6 out of 10. And then those of you that answered there is no training program, hopefully what I'm going to provide you at the end of this presentation will help you think through maybe what you want to do around awareness and training. All right, so let's go on. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about some trends, and one of these trends is around authentication. So sorry for the slides here. So authentication is kind of how I would protect you as a client at Fifth Third Bank. I would challenge your employees through multi-factor authentication, which I'm sure most of you probably know. We have a lot of different ways that we can do this, whether it is prompting for some kind of passcode, whether it's requiring an RSA token, things like that. I also have a rules engine that runs against logins to systems that we're trying to figure out is someone that's unauthorized accessing your system. And then, of course, we have to look across all different interactions, not just where they come into a branch or calling on the phone. Why is this important to you? Because these techniques are ways that you can partner with your financial institution to help get the right strategies in place to protect access to bank accounts. And here at Fifth Third, we have a platform, obviously specially designed for commercial and business clients, and we work these tools in to try to monitor and protect them from fraud. So when we talk about fraud, there's a bunch of different fraud, and I heard up front that this is a series. There was a cyber group, so I'm not going to get too deep into the cyber stuff. Although I will give you some examples of kind of what's going on out there from a gaming perspective that you should probably be aware of if you're not. I'm really focused on the left side of this, the smishing, phishing. I read a statistic a couple weeks ago where 90% of the fraud that's perpetrated against businesses is done through links clicked in emails or phones. And in your case, emails, right? So your employee gets an email, there's a link in it, they follow that link, And in general, that's not good. If they know the person, if they know the third party, you can make it safer. But the issue is that in general, employees just hit the link. And what that link does, it's not just trying to gain information from your employees. What it's really trying to do is put malicious software on the devices. And so we worry about that from a social engineering perspective, right? Where our customers can get duped into going places they shouldn't, giving out credentials, doing this and that. But I worry about it with my commercial clients when I'm going to a link where wire instructions are requested to be changed, payees being changed, things like that. And this again is pretty basic training. At Fifth Third, as an employee at Fifth Third, when I get an email, I actually have a little button at the top of my screen that I can press suspicious email, and it goes off to our InfoSec folks over in cyber to review whether or not that truly is a malicious email. So those are some techniques that we've put in play to make employees aware that, hey, and it's a big icon, by the way, on my email, so I'm always looking at it. And every time I get an email, it reminds me to be careful with these emails, especially from folks I don't know. Now, one of the things at the bottom here, vishing, and I'll be real brief on this, but I find it fascinating, is impersonation. So voice printing, I talk to friends out there and they always have fraud stories about someone calling them, running a scam, right? The old IRS scam, or there's a warrant out for your arrest. And they like to play with those fraudsters. And while it can be in the short time fun and you can game them up a little bit, but really you don't want your voice being captured anywhere. And some of the more sophisticated stuff we're seeing out there, especially in Europe, this is happening, is voice printing and then using your voice to instruct others. For example, we had a big incident in the UK where a CEO's voice was printed, and then they made a call to an accounts payable employee demanding that employee, who was a very junior employee, send $1 million to this address immediately. So it can get really sophisticated, but generally speaking, most of the fraud is contained in not clicking links. And you can see on the right side, there's ransomware, there's spyware, there's malware. I'm going to give you a real live example of spyware and how dangerous it can be. But it generally starts with some intrusion on your network, and it is often based on a self-inflicted wound. So I do have some statistics on the right side. I encourage you to look at some of the things in the industry that affect you. And I'm going to give you some things here on the medical side, the healthcare side. I'm not going to read all these statistics, but I'll leave it in the deck so you can see what's going on. Obviously, the topic du jour is ransomware. And yes, it does occur, and it is occurring more frequently. But there are other basic blocking and tackling that I think are more important right now. We'll talk a little bit about cyber and info security in a second, but here's just some things that's going on in your industry that I wanted to make you aware of. So let's go to another polling question here. And this is fraud. I should have probably been very clear. What would you think is the biggest threat to your firm on a day-to-day basis? Is it this social engineering where your employees can get duped into doing things? Do you find your employees clicking links that's putting pressure on your cyber environment? Or do you just feel uncomfortable that you've got the right cyber controls out there? So we'll let you answer this one. I think at Fifth Third, I'd say all the above. I didn't give you guys that easy way out, but we worry about everything, especially us fraud folks. All right. There you go. So that's where I'm at with you all too. I think when we get into these emails, some of it too, I want to be, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback this stuff, really easy, but some of it is sophisticated. They've got methods to really make it look like one of your suppliers. That's why it's a top of mind exercise, right? It's constantly reinforcing that you should never do this through your annual training program. We do bulletins here at the bank. We'll send out to our retail folks in our branch network if we find something emerging. So we talked earlier about a formal annualized training program. That is great, but you should consider these every now and then reminders of what could go wrong. And I'm really glad that no one has overly concerned about the perimeter because, one, it's obviously very important. But two, if you've got a strong perimeter, it does allow you to get more tactical in fraud prevention and detection. And that's one of the things that we're proud of here at the bank is we really have a strong cyber group. So we will move on. I want to talk about a game that I've seen played last summer, and it's still going on. So I was in a meeting with some of my peers at very large banks, and they're struggling with this. And let me explain kind of what this game is. So fraudsters have realized that when people tend to want to go to a website, like a bank site or a supplier site or whatever, they use Google too much. So they will do an open search, and if you open search Fifth Third Bank, of course, what happens is the top of the search findings is generally advertisements, right? That is how the internet works in terms of getting your brand at the top and trying to sell things. Now, the problem is that fraud has figured out that that's what most people do when they Google, and they'll just click on the first result because it says Fifth Third Bank in this situation, right? But really, that's a fake site. That site has been set up by a fraudster, and the fraudster now has the consumer or employee or anyone, and for that matter, in a captive site. So they've now got you on a fake site that you believe is a real site, your real bank site. And here's how the game works. They will basically say there's a technical error with the site. If you want to, do something, log in, for example, you want to log into your account. And what they do is they'll ask you go ahead and give us your login credentials, and we're going to redirect you. And that's how they'll get your username and password. And then some of the more sophisticated stuff will say, the site is down, there's nothing we can do. We now have your username. Please give us a call, and we'll help you with your account. And of course, you're calling a boiler room, a fraud boiler room. You're calling the bad guy. And so the fraudster is going to glean as much information from your employee as they possibly can. And then, of course, when they go to move money, they're actually on your site because the username and password has been given. When they go to move money and there's a step up, they have you on the phone, and they're going to try to get a one-time passcode, an RSA code, however you do multi-factor authentication or how your bank does it. That's what they're going to ask for. And then now they've got the username, password, the authentication tool, and now it's a matter of just simply moving money. And the money gets moved domestically because that's a low-risk wire, and then they'll bounce it around a few times to a couple mules, and it goes overseas and it's gone. And what we're seeing is this being converted to cryptocurrency. So I mentioned we've seen this last summer, and we figured very quickly how to disable these sites, and other banks are doing the same thing. But the easy thing here is bookmark your sites, the valuable ones where money's moving around, suppliers, banks, insurance companies, anything you're doing business with where money goes around. Your employees should be bookmarking those sites and not doing Google searches. Sounds easy? It's actually not, and we see this quite commonly. So I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk to you about a pretty sophisticated spyware event that we've seen. When I say this did not come from Fifth Third, this came from a peer of ours, although I got my mind to thinking about how am I going to defend against something like this, and how do I create awareness out there in the community to make sure our clients and customers don't fall victim to this. But here's kind of how this one works, and it goes back to the malware. So your employee clicks on a link, which we already said, all of you unanimously agree that that is the risk that you worry the most about. So the employee clicks the link, but maybe nothing happens. Maybe they don't get instructions to do wires. Maybe nothing literally happens. It opens up an about blank site. It could be anything. But what's happening is spyware is being downloaded onto the PC. And some of the spyware is a little bit further ahead than some of the virus protection, malware protection. It's kind of cutting edge. This is kind of where the fraud's going, which is the fraud's going places where it doesn't make you think. So for example, if you click a link and it asks you to change a wire instruction, you're thinking. If you create an awareness, if you've got training, your employees are thinking. But when they click on this by accident and they're not instructed to do anything, it's forgotten. That's why that report suspicious email is really important if you can implement something like that. So all the spyware, all it's doing, it's sitting in the background. It's running, it's watching what this person's doing. It's looking at payments that are made. It's looking at credentials. You know, we always say don't use the same username and password. Well, okay, easier said than done. But let's say that people do legitimately use a different username and password for every relationship they have, every engagement that they have as part of their work. It's pulling all of that. It's pulling all the username and passwords. And it's able then to take over your account. Now, where this gets really sophisticated is it's also studying the behavior. So it may not grab those credentials and do a wire today. It may not grab those credentials and try to do an ACH. It may grab those credentials, keep watching to see the pattern of payments that you're making. What's the dollar range of these payments? Where do they mostly go? What's the concentration, right? So fraud always tries to stay what we call in pattern. And when they go out of pattern, that's generally when they're easy to catch. So what they're doing is they're using this spyware to really watch what your employees are doing, what you might be doing as a consumer yourself. And it's starting to build a quote unquote persona of how this particular person is interacting. And then once it gets enough information to feel like it can pull the best game, that's when payments are done. That's when drainage occurs. And that's when you find out that you've had some kind of intrusion on your network. Again, if you have a strong security front end, the perimeter is well protected, it's going to catch a lot of this. But what I'm hearing from my peers is that the spyware is starting to get a little bit in front of the techniques to prevent it. And it's underneath what's going on, so it's not noticed. And it is a major issue if the drainage begins. So just something to think about on the spyware front. I look at this from my own perspective as a consumer, as someone that logs onto my bank account. And I think about the dangers of this, of them knowing me, and not just financially, but all my PII, all my information. So I wanted to show you this one because I think it's, when I say what's on the horizon, what I worry about, sure, I worry about ransomware, but I worry about this dormant malicious software that you're just not going to see. It's not going to ring a bell for the engagement with your employees. All right, one more polling question here. So how confident are you? Now, I heard everybody was worried about links. No one was worried about the perimeter. But what's your confidence level with catching this type of malware, with spyware, et cetera? So we'll give you a chance to weigh in on this. I'm telling you personally, as a fraud expert, been in this for 20 years, I'm in the middle. I'm somewhat confident, but the game changes very quickly, and you have to be really agile in how you defend. So we'll let everyone answer here. All right, so you're with me. I think when I look at the environment in general between banks and businesses and consumers, obviously my view changes. When I say I'm somewhat confident, maybe you're all in the same boat with me. I don't know what I don't know. That's always in the back of my mind. That's always a risk. That's why, as this being my profession, the first thing I do in the morning is try to bone up on what's going on out there. And that's a tactic that's really helped me a lot in getting in front of trends, emerging threats, et cetera. But I'm also fortunate to be able to talk to peers. And it sounds like, I'm presenting to a network of peers. You're part of a group that are like-minded, same business objectives, and your competitors probably at times. I am with other banks too, but we consistently and constantly talk to one another about fraud. We don't talk about marketing, we don't talk about products, of course, but we talk about fraud and techniques that we use. So for those of you that are somewhat confident or not confident, I highly recommend that you use your peer network to understand what they're doing, what's their best practices, what they've seen, right? So I'm always famous for saying, if Bank of America has a fraudulent event, I'm on a 90-day clock. I've got 90 days to be in front of that because eventually Bank of America will solve it, it'll jump to Chase. Chase will solve it, it'll jump to Regions. Eventually it's coming to me. And I view that same context with any kind of like-minded consortium like yourselves. The best way to learn fraud, to understand what your risk is to talk to one another. Talking to me, I'm going to give you this global perspective. Talking to your peers is going to give you a very direct view of your risk. So hopefully you're doing that. I've found it invaluable throughout my career. So I told you I was going to leave you with some. Now this is where I get a little long-winded, so bear with me for a second. I want to leave you with what we call, this is the check the box, right? These are things that we've seen. I mentioned earlier, 90% of the fraud in the general commercial space is clicking links, malicious software coming down. So we know that. We know the tactics to defend against it. But there's so much more that are easy tactics that can deliver a lot of value, save you a lot of headaches. We a couple folks that helped me prepare for this, they had this list of all the things that you go through when this happens, when you have some kind of event. There's a lot of emotion to it. There's an employee that's probably fearing for their job. And I've also found that with fraud, scare tactics do not work. They actually go the opposite direction you think. When people are nervous, when people are fearful of making a mistake, that's exactly when they make mistakes. So when we talk about fraud externally, it's more about being smart and taking the easy stuff out of play. And sure, you can worry about the stuff that's sophisticated, very difficult to control, etc. We understand that. But the emotion with a fraud event is a very big deal. And it depending on how you operate, depending on where that event occurs, that is contagious. And so you get a group of employees that are very fearful in their job. That makes them unhappy. That makes them make more mistakes, as I mentioned. So let's talk about some really easy tactics that I think we can deploy together, whether you're banking with us or you're banking with another bank. These are things that you should talk to your bankers about. We talk about the cyber piece, that goes without saying. You got to have the malware protection, and you've got to explore this. You've got to continue to evolve with what you're trying to do here. So big deal is having this perimeter defense, which I heard through the polling. Everyone feels pretty good about that, or most of you do. So that's good. Check the box. Dual control. Now, the bigger the business, the easier it is to do dual control. And when I say dual control, if you're going to send a wire out for $50,000, you should probably have two people approving it. Two people that can be stepped up through multi-factor authentication to approve something. Now, smaller businesses, they tend to struggle with this because the CEO and the CFO and the CEO are the same person. And so sometimes they don't have the resources, they don't have the personnel, they don't have the sophisticated infrastructure to do dual control. But I can tell you now, in your business, what you do, the dangers that fraud poses for you, this is a big deal for us. Some banks absolutely require it. If you want to move money, you must have dual control. And it doesn't have to be overly cumbersome. You can flow it out to where it's easy. But what you don't want is have dual control with two people sitting beside one another. It's going to defeat the purpose. The thing about dual control that I've found that's been really strong is when you have a processor as control one and a manager as control two. Not two processors, not two managers. You want different levels of eyes on this. Processors having their eyes on something, that's someone that's day-to-day, used to seeing transactions, used to conducting transactions. They're your best defense against fraud. And then your managers obviously are providing some oversight and making sure that this works out right, because once a wire's gone, especially internationally, as you probably know, some of you unfortunately have probably experienced, it's very difficult for your bank to kill chain that and get that back. When it's domestic, you got to get a dispute in as soon as possible. You got to get a claim in. You got to refer the fraud, and you got to tell your relationship manager, your banker, that something has happened. Because if you do this timely, if you do this same day, for example, we have ways to go try to secure that money on behalf of you, and we do that. We have a team that does that here at the bank. So that timeliness of finding the error is so important. for you to notify your bank's fraud group, your third party's fraud. I mean, anyone that you're doing business with that has fraud people, communication with them is essential. And sometimes that dual control will prevent it from going out. Sometimes that dual control is an accidental second person clicks it and realizes immediately I shouldn't have done that. We see that every day. And if they get a hold of their relationship manager, their account manager, their bank immediately, we have a lot of success helping our clients out. I mentioned the bookmark piece. I know it sounds really elementary, but it's really important. And after seeing the events go down last year and still seeing some of my peers struggle with this, I've actually gone personally to my PC at home where I go on the bank accounts or pay bills and all that stuff. I've bookmarked it all. No more Google searching. It saves me time in the end. Because that's a current trend, because it's widespread, I'm strongly recommending that this is a big takeaway from this discussion today. Obviously, never give out anything over the phone. This is part of your annual training, but it goes beyond that. The fraudster is patient. They will basically establish some type of rapport. They may not ask you for anything on that first call. It may be just, I'm trying to get some information and it's not privileged, it's not private, and the employee gives it, and then the second time they call, they ask for something else, it's still in bounds, and then they call again, and now all of a sudden they're asking for specific things. And it's a problem. We still can see it happening over and over despite warnings. But it's so important to be part of your annual policy and plan. At the top of the right column, this is one that I've seen become more effective over time. And that is, how do you do business in your account? So some of our clients have accounts set up where they're zero balance accounts, they're just clearing accounts. Okay, those are kind of wide open. But some of our clients have accounts that they're just running ACH through. That's it. They don't write checks on it. They don't do anything else. And as a bank, I can block checks from presenting against your account. So counterfeit checks coming in, if you tell me up front when we establish a relationship that you're never going to write a check off this account, we can block that and we can stop that potential threat for you. Or vice versa. Hey, I'm only going to write checks. I'm never going to do an ACH. I can block that function for you. But at the top of the funnel, one of the things that really works, and it takes a little bit of work on your side, is what we call positive pay. And I think there's a form of that just about every financial institution. But basically what we're doing is we know what checks you've issued, and we know what checks we're going to pay on your behalf. It's very simple. Like I said, it takes a little bit of work to set up, but we're never going to honor a check that you didn't issue if you're set up. And you can even set that up at the payee level to say, here's the only payees I'm going to have. So I encourage you to go through your inventory of bank accounts and really understand the purpose for that account. Now, many accounts are just, you're doing a lot of business through them. You're doing ACH, you're doing wires, you're doing checks, that's fine, understood. But if you do have certain accounts set up that are specific use, it's in your best interest to let your banker or relationship manager know what you want to use that account for, and then we can get in front of a potential fraud event just like that. We talked about training. I won't go much further on this, other than I'm really excited to see that response on the training. You don't understand how rare you are. And by the way, some people say they have training, and it's a piece of paper, right? Here's some do's and don'ts. We've found, the more interactive that you can get with your training program, where there's a quiz in there, where there's points within the training that your employees have to click on something, answer a question. Maybe they aren't tested, but they're engaged, the better. And tell stories in your training. Give real life examples, not just here's a fraud type. Here's why this is important. This is what's happened to other people in our industry. And that's where your peer-to-peer reviews come in. If a peers face some fraud, this is a great way to add it into your training as a real life example. We find that the most valuable as far as getting the point across. If a person can actually relate it to something real, it sticks. It's better. Use only secure websites. Okay, that's a no-brainer. I think that goes back to the bookmark piece, right? Where if you're bookmarked, you're on a secure site. Everyone knows if you see that little lock at the top, you're on a secure site. So I won't go that very deep. On the links, there's a couple things going on I just want to make you aware of, and then I'm going to close this down with another question. things that we're seeing around attacking your employees. It's not just getting them to click links. They are using LinkedIn. They are trying to figure out what your employees do. They're trying to figure out, back in, what was it, March of 20, when everybody started going home to work. And some very large companies made that known. I mean, we're a great company. We're letting all of our employees go home from work. Okay, that's a signal. So now you've got a pandemic going. You've got an employee that's newly assigned at home. They're trying to get their bearings. They've got dogs barking in the background, kids that are distracted, and they're harvesting this information right off LinkedIn to know that this is an employee that works from home. We know that. The company told us, and they're in accounts payable. Let's target them. I mean, there are fraud types that'll try 1,000 things to get one success, but there are smart fraudsters that want that one-to-one success rate. And so they're doing their homework. They're looking at what you do. They're looking at your employees. They're looking at your policies. So while LinkedIn is great for communicating out to both your employees, customers, et cetera, it's really important to understand what they're trying to do with that information. So just something to think about. We had the same struggles I'm sure you all had. We had folks that had to go home. We had folks that we required to stay in. And it was just kind of interesting to see how the fraud grasped that. There's a special place for some of these folks, and taking advantage of something like that. I mean, that's the bottom of the barrel in my opinion. So again, it's not just about links. It's knowing who's getting targeted, understanding that certain job families, certain job types require more training than others. People moving money, obviously, but management has to know fraud. They have to know it. They can't rely on middle management. Executive management needs to know fraud. They need to be part of the training. They need to be part of creating the training. It's really important for fraud education awareness to be top down and not middle down or bottom up. Please start at the top with the executives. So let me put another question for you here, and then we'll open this up for Q&A if anyone's got anything. So based on what I just presented you, and you probably have fraud prevention policies, how would you characterize your fraud prevention policies? And again, pretty simple stuff. When I say poor, though, I mean would think about those 8, 10 boxes I checked before. That's where you're not taking the easy steps, the tactics. Strong is those basic moves that you've got those covered. Those things are in play. So I'll let you answer here. All right, adequate. Okay, so again, as a fraud person, they say it's not paranoia if people are really out to get you, right? That's how I am. I feel like we're probably like-minded on this, is that, yes, I'm doing things, I'm taking proactive measures, I'm working hard, but I still always have got concerns. If that's the mentality, that's really good. That's how fraud people think. That's just exactly how risk people think, really. For those of you that's, financial professionals, you're always thinking of where dollars can fall out of your organization. In closing though, I want to give you a couple other things to think about. In my journey, vision, mission of fraud, I was in the line for a lot of years, and I stepped into this role. And I really thought that my fraud risk here was within the products that I offered, the lines of business that I supported, the various things that banks put out there. I always thought my real hard fraud risk was out in those products. Are those products built right? Are we doing what we need to do to protect the customer and the bank by designing products the right way? And what I found out about halfway through, a couple of years ago, was the real fraud, the stuff that you really have to pay attention to, is in operations. It's not in there is fraud risk in your products for sure, but you're designing those with that risk in mind. Operations is where you've got to focus on fraud, where money moves in your organization, people that move that money, that's where you've got to zero in. And I can tell you now that that's been a real game changer for Fifth Third Bank and how we manage fraud, is that we now have all groups in our view when we measure fraud, when we do control assessments. We do it now globally across the enterprise, across various lines and operations. So I'm going to turn this over for questions, but I really thank you for spending time. Anyone that's on here, you're already in the right direction. You're thinking about it. You're engaged. We value that with our clients. I'm sure if you're not banking with Fifth Third, your bank values that. I want to thank you again for your business. If you are banking with Fifth Third, and I'll turn it back over to Michael, who's got some questions probably.
Yeah. Well, again, just to remind everybody, Tom, thanks a lot. That was awesome. And just to remind everybody who have questions out there, our lines are muted. So please, I encourage you to use the chat function for any questions that you might have. And while those questions are keying up, I figured I'd go ahead and ask one of my own, considering I have that opportunity. In terms of healthcare and the amount of money that's within healthcare, as well as sensitive information, tell me a little bit about, and seeing what you were just talking about in terms of operation, tell me a little bit about how Fifth Third Bank works to help train employees at all levels to protect the sensitive information as well as money of our clients, and kind of how that could be extrapolated into our healthcare partners.
Yeah, it's interesting. Every vertical is a little bit different. You know, your patient information is probably the most risky thing that you are over top of, right? Yes, financials always important, but patient information is what you're trying to protect at all costs. And so for us, obviously we have the annual formalized training through modules that our employees go through. But when it comes to the custodians of personal information, how we exchange data, there's special tactics and training that we use to teach people, first of all, what truly is personally identified information, right? So what really is the risk? Is someone's first name risky? No, it's everything else. So I think what we've tried to do is explain to our employees the true, what we have restricted, confidential, right, internal. So all of our documents are classified in those realms. And I'd highly encourage that, because again, when you put a label over top of something, it makes people think. Restricted information. It's really important to train your folks on what really is meaningful, what could cause a big problem. So for us, I hope that answered your question, Michael. Having those categories of information, what's really important, has I think is been effective for us to train employees.
Sorry, let me try that again and unmute my line. That was an excellent explanation. And just building off of that, I was asking, how do you bring that same thought process in terms of training employees? What about our clients and our patients?
Yeah, I've been asked this before, like these degrees of awareness. Like, so for in your example, you've got employees and then you've got patients. It's not easy. I think for us, what we do with, like, I do these kinds of things for clients. I do frequently to try to help managers at our clients understand where the risk is. You've heard me say this before. If you can't put a real situation around the risk, it's not going to be effective. You're not going to communicate effectively. So what we try to do with clients and even consumers to some degree is explain what is happening. What truly is going on? Why am I giving you this training? Well, here's the big things that's going on in our industry. And so the patient one, though, which is, again, how I look at my consumer customers, that's the hard one to figure out. Like, how do you want to put that in front of them? I think with patients, it's, you have to put out what they're risking with their information. What kind of patient fraud is occurring today? Like, what are we seeing in the industry? And again, I know I'm harping on it, but just put real live examples of what to watch out for, right? So if you're able to get that kind of awareness, and you all actually are in a really good position because you've got this probably high level of trust with your patients. You'd be surprised how much they're looking for this, how much they need this. And by the way, anything you teach them on the fraud front, you're helping the entire environment. So that's, I don't know if that was helpful, but that's how I view this. It's give them practical examples of why it's important.
No, truly appreciate that. With that, I think we have a fairly quiet crowd today. But Tom, I really want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking this time out of your schedule today to present to us. For the folks on the line, if you require CPE, you'll receive an email in the next couple of business days with a link or a download to your certificate. I would like to thank all of the HFMA members and their guests for joining us today, and truly appreciate everyone's opportunity to participate and join us today. With that, just want to thank everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and have a great Wednesday.